Kia, perfect. Kia ora koutou and welcome to today's lunch and learn session with Pada. Ko tange te keo toko moanga, ko Abel Tasman toko moana, ko Hopkins toko ingoa whānau, ko Merv Roa, ko Julie Okumatua, no Perth aho, ko Amy toko ingoa. I'm Amy, I'm the General Manager for Pada, and I'll be helping facilitate the session along with Julia, who has just meant she was just talking about doing the recording. Before we launch into anything else, I just wanted to see if anyone wanted to open us with a karakia. If not, I can do that. I just wanted to give others the opportunity. Okay. Mā te whakapono, mā te tōmanako, mā te te tiro, mā te whakarongo, mā te mahi tahi, mā te whakamomori, mā te aroha, ka teo e mātou. By believing and trusting, by having faith and hope, by looking and searching, by listening and hearing, by working and striving together, by shared desire and determination, by all being done with compassion, we will succeed. We're glad to have you all with us here today. A couple of things before we go a bit further is and I can see you're all pretty much doing it, if you're not talking, if you could keep your microphones on mute. I would love to see all your faces if you're comfortable with that. If you feel comfortable to turn your cameras on, that'd be awesome. If not, totally understand that it's lunchtime and you want to be eating. But yeah, if you felt comfortable to turn your cameras on, that would be great. So we're so happy to have everyone here with us today to explore what we consider to be a really important topic, the impact that disabilities can have on accessing the birthing system and the follow-on mental health effects during that perinatal period. Today's session, we're going to explore it from two key angles. So first, how suitable support can be provided to a person with a disability during the perinatal journey through effective advocacy and accessibility to services. And second, how to support parents who either receive a diagnosis early in pregnancy or give birth to a child with a disability. We're fortunate to be joined by four amazing speakers who will bring both their professional insights and lived experience to this kōrero. I'll introduce each speaker as we go along. So our first speaker today is Anna Reid, a disability rights education worker in primary healthcare, who will speak about her personal experiences navigating the healthcare system through two pregnancies. So Anna, I invite you to take over from me.
Kia ora, everyone. I'm just making sure that you can hear me because I'm at work. So I'm just making sure that this is working. If you could just give me a thumbs up just to show that you can hear me. Lovely. So kia ora, koana. Kuingoa, I am from the lovely Te Waipunamu, the South Island, and I live in Porirua with my husband and our two children. And I am a disabled person myself with both invisible and non-invisible disabilities. And so today I'll talk a little bit about my experience with my lovely two tamariki who are now 9 and 7, which so it feels like a little time ago since I was in that perinatal space, but I feel ready to talk about it now. So I'm a mother, a writer, an educator, and a really strong advocate for the rights a rights-based approach for disabled people in our health system. So I had my first child, Ted, in 2013, and my second child, my little Light, my little Lucy, in 2017. And both my children were really wanted and really planned by my husband and I. And before getting pregnant, I had been in, I guess, what people would call relatively good health. I was a teacher. I worked full time. We traveled. We had a nice sort of quiet life. I wasn't young, but I didn't know too many people who had had babies before me, except maybe my mum and my grandma, and they both had pregnancies in little rural towns or on the farms and had worked right through and said, oh no, it's easy, it's good, having two, three, four children. So I thought, great, I can do this. That's really cool. If my mum can have a kid in a backpackers in Central Otago, like I'm in a big city, I'm probably good. But it was only a few weeks after I found out I was pregnant with our first tamaiti Ted, actually, that I realized that things weren't good. I had awful pain, which we thought was a one-off thing. It can happen, that's fine. But it was not a one-time thing. The whole pregnancy, I spent either in pain or nausea or bleeding, or lots of other things. And at 20 weeks, my husband was in Canberra for work, and I had lost so much blood that we thought that he we would not make it through the pregnancy. Um, Despite the odds, the pregnancy continued. I carried him nearly to term, not quite, and he was healthy but small. I wasn't fine. I wasn't able to breastfeed either, and that was a big thing. And we didn't have any support with that either. We didn't have any support for bottle feeding either, even though that was what we needed to do. Um, so at 5 days postpartum, I went into my GP, who showed me how to bottle feed and what to buy and the sterilizers and all of those kinds of things, um, because it had been assumed all the way through that we would be able to breastfeed. And the pain didn't go away either. That was something that continued and formed what would be years of disability. We had a couple of miscarriages, and then after that, I became pregnant with our daughter in 2017. And that pregnancy was worse than the first, which nobody thought was possible. The first one was pretty bad, and the second one was exponentially worse. I spent most of my pregnancy in hospital, which was really isolating. I was still trying to work, and I didn't talk to many people actually, or manage to get out of bed a lot. My main view during that time was hospital walls. If I was lucky, my bedroom. If I was very lucky and I could get out to work, then I could do that. It was a real struggle each day. Um, and I had a team of midwives. I was under the hospital team, and it was a January due date. So there's really not a lot of hope of any way of finding a midwife for a January birth. But for me, I probably needed one person, just due to the complexity of the pregnancy. And I didn't really, I had the standard checks, and maybe sometimes slightly more if I was in hospital, but it was more to check on the baby and not to check on me. Um, and I didn't have a person who knew me consistently, which I think would have been really helpful, is to have had someone who had checked in on me, who knew my circumstances, who knew what had been through the first time. Um, because when I was told that if I was anxious if I couldn't feel my baby, and so we asked for monitoring, but given what I'd been through, that was completely understandable. And so when it came time for the birth, again, there were lots of things around it. I'd had lots of trauma the first time and after, and there wasn't a great plan put in for the birth. In fact, I didn't know that I could come up with a birth plan until friends had told me that that's what they were doing for their babies. And when I asked why I couldn't do that, the answer was, well, it's going to be a C-section, and there's not a lot of choice around how that happens or when that happens or who that happens with. And so I didn't really feel empowered. In fact, I was really scared about that. And the best part about the best person who was actually present at the birth was the anaesthetist, who was amazing and gave me lots of choices on the day, which made me feel a bit more empowered. But in every other way, I felt very scared and very traumatized. Um, I didn't have a midwife that I knew in with me in the birth. Um, we had a little girl who, despite all the odds, was doing well, and we were able to breastfeed due to engaging private help, which was a huge privilege, but it felt safer than some of the alternatives. And when I had her, the pain continued actually. And at that point, I had two children at home, and I was experiencing pain. And my partner was able to take 6 weeks off work through his work, which again was an amazing privilege. It was really helpful. But when he went back to work, it was me with two children and a really disabling pain condition. And so I did end up seeing maternal mental health. I think that we didn't engage with Plunkett or any of those types of systems actually because they didn't feel particularly safe, and especially for people in my circumstances. But we were able to get some help through maternal mental health, and we got someone to help around the house, which was quite helpful because those sort of practical things I was struggling to do. But the system really wasn't set up for people um, who didn't, for my needs, I had quite high needs, but I wasn't able to access any kind of funding through a needs assessment service. And I kind of fell into a weird hole where I didn't quite qualify for any help through traditional methods, despite having quite high needs. Um, and at the same time, it was sort of those systems also weren't set up for people with really young children either. So there was a big gap there. And what I needed was probably a really safe place or person where I could kind of unpack what had happened, and then help me through that experience of mothering, but also mothering with significant health issues. But instead, I got even more sort of judgment at that point when I was accessing health services, suggestions that I wasn't in pain. It took 8 years to find out the reason for the pain and to get that treated, which was a long time, but also unfortunately in line with what a lot of women and birthing parents can experience. Um, and we do know that, unfortunately, that disabled parents or disabled mama in particular are likely to face more judgment and bias in our health system. Um, and one of the things I thought would have been really helpful was really empowering and helping me to build some of those social connections in my community instead of I spent a lot of time going to different places for help, Newtown and other places that were quite far from where I lived. Um, and helping with those supportive relationships because one of the things that gave me joy when I was able to do them was going to space, was going to mothers groups, was coffee, and coffee groups and those regular things that parents do and going for walks in the pram. But if I did that, I would need assistance to do that, and then I would probably have a week in bed after. Um, and so it was only when I was able to make some friends who weren't in the same situation, but were in a similar situation where I was able to um, make some great friends, talk about the challenges I was facing, and be really honest about that in a really safe environment. Because on top of the sort of physical challenges that I was experiencing, I also had really severe postnatal depression. And that happened after my first pregnancy, but it was worse after my second. And when my daughter was a baby, we did go through a complaints process talking about that experience of how I had felt during the birth, before and after, and what would have helped with that feeling of safety. And we really hope that some changes would have been made there, just to be told the names of people who are looking after us, to have names and photos on websites of the people who are involved in your care, just to make you feel safe. Um, and also just having people, especially for people with more complex needs, just having one person, one or two people ideally who know you and can build that relationship with you. And because sometimes it takes a lot more time to feel safe. And I think if I'd had a midwife that I'd had a really good relationship with, things would have been different. But, the reality of having a January due date meant that was a lot more difficult to achieve. Um, and the other thing I would have really liked was just knowing what supports were out there, whether there was community things, whether someone could have taken me to some of those events if they were a little bit further away, if I was unable to drive, and really helping me to build up those relationships locally because we know that local people, places, and spaces are really important. And where we live now, so we moved out by the beach where we now have a beautiful village of people who, even though I still have that experience of disability, really provide that village and that support and wrap themselves around us when we need support with meals and childcare and play dates and spending time with me if I'm at home and those kinds of things that are really helpful. And the other thing I would have, I had used, when my child was older, I used a respite service, and I had wished that, there really was that respite available where babies and their birthing parent could be there together. That would have been really wonderful as well. And just support groups in particular, especially for people who don't have that. And I don't think there is a typical experience of parenting, to be honest, but for people who have that maybe slightly more imperfect experience of parenting or starting, really amazing to have that support of other people who are going through that. It took a wee while for me to meet other parents who hadn't had that picture perfect experience, but when I did, that was a huge thing. I met someone on an online group, and we met up locally, and were able to talk about our challenges, and then talk, at midnight, 3, 4 a.m., and really unpack some of those shared experiences that we're going through. And that was a huge lifeline, really empowering. And I'm still friends with some of those lovely people years later, even though our children are bordering between 7 and 10 now. Um, and then eventually we moved out to the water, which keeps me well and still keeps me well today, ocean swimming. And I really decided to critically examine how our health system did or didn't work. So when my youngest daughter was 1, I went and did a Master of Health in Health Policy and Health Promotion to really understand what were the barriers and why did we have the experience that we had, even though I came with quite a lot of privilege, I also really struggled. So I finished my Master of Health. COVID struck, and I did it from home. And in 2022, I started my current mahi. I work in disability rights and equity, and because I was a teacher before, I bring a lot of that education. Um, Focus now to talking to health professionals about some of the barriers for people and what that can look like, and some of the frustration, some of the trauma, and also moving into talking about accessibility, making spaces more accessible for disabled people to feel safe. And one of the things that I've really, one of the things I've really realized is that, that extra time and space and reassurance that people need to actually feel safe and to know that they can talk about things, and that their approach will be strengths-based and we'll build them up. We have, I think, as society, this idea about being a perfect parent and what that means, and that's definitely not the experience that a lot of people have. And connecting people to really form that village, whatever that village looks like, whether it's online or it's in person, that can be really helpful. And I just, one of the things I always reflect on is that, is that we all have such different needs, and sometimes there's a lot of things that people don't tell you, a lot of trauma in the background, a lot of it can be intergenerational trauma, things people have gone through that often pop up during that perinatal time, and that definitely happened for me. Um, and so asking people and keeping on asking them, I think, is something that would, definitely add to that feeling of safety. If someone had asked me those questions, then I think I would have felt a lot safer to have talked about some of my experiences, and then my overall maybe I would have had a more accessible experience overall. So, sometimes we do need to find, creative ways to get people the help they need, extra time or extra space, finding out about what's triggering people. So the experience of birth and breastfeeding can be particularly traumatic for some people. And so some of the work I'm doing at the moment is helping to design services with our whakaha whaiora population, and also giving health professionals the tools to be able to have those conversations, to ask people about their access needs, and to look at the accessibility of an environment. Because I think that all those things really, really help, as well as, finding ways to support and create a village around our disabled parents. And that's sort of my experience summed up. Um, yeah.
Thank you, Anna. Does anyone have any questions that they wanted to ask at the moment? We will have um, questions at the end as well, but if anyone's got anything top of mind, or if you're not wanting to ask it yourself, feel free to pop it in the chat, maybe even directly to Julia if that helps at Parter, and she can ask them for you as well. Um, I thought that was a really well-crafted journey through your experience, and then really highlighting the things that would have helped you, Anna. I've noted quite a few things down that I'll take away and kind of highlight for people after this. But thank you so much. That was really insightful. Um, Next up, I would like to welcome and introduce Meredith Dyer. She's the Wellington coordinator for Parent to Parent and host of the podcast That's Good to Know. Meredith will share about the services Parent to Parent provides and the importance of balancing medical and societal perspectives on disability while upholding the good life principles. Welcome, Meredith.
Kia ora. Thanks so much. Hi everyone. It's great to be here, and great to follow Anna there. So, because that's a good segue into what I've got to talk about, really. So I thought I'd just start off by letting you know a little bit about my experience in the disability space and why I'm here, why I'm doing this particular role for Parent to Parent. I've been in this role for just over a year now, and it's kind of my first big job, I guess, after being a stay-at-home mum for many years. So I've got two boys, one's 15 and one is nearly 9. We also live in Porirua near the beach, and I'm wondering if it is a similar beach to you, Anna, where I'm in Te Tahi Bay. So my sort of journey started when my eldest son was about 2.5. He had developed normally up until then. Not that we were aware of really kind of anything along the lines of autism or disability or anything like that. But certainly looking back on some of my Facebook memories, it's pretty obvious that something was going on. We just didn't really know. He used to stack plates in formations on the kitchen floor and put knives in between the cupboards and things like that and line them up. And anyway, so when he was about 2.5, he suddenly had a seizure out of nowhere. He was found face down in the sandpit at preschool. And it was really frightening. No one really kind of saw what happened, so didn't really know what was going on. But we presume that that's, looking back now, that that's what that first incident actually was. So, he kind of went into hospital. They couldn't see anything wrong. And probably it wasn't until about 6 months later that suddenly, out of nowhere again, he had a seizure. And it was a full tonic-clonic convulsive seizure. So again, gone into hospital. He didn't have a temperature, so it wasn't a febrile convulsion. They just couldn't find anything that indicated why he'd had it. And then probably about, I think it was sort of 3 months or a little bit later than that, he started having them more frequently. So they sort of came in, like once every couple of weeks, and then once a week. And then by the age of sort of 3.5, he was having a lot, 50 a day sometimes, would go into status epilepticus as well. So we would have to go into HDU and have IV anticonvulsants so that they could stop it. The only one that worked was phenobarbital, which knocked him out basically and kind of left him in a coma-like state. So he was, after that, not able to really kind of feed himself, talk, walk, or anything like that. So that went on for about 2 years. So it's an interesting start to our journey into the disability space, because we kind of started in more of a medical, kind of world. It was all about kind of what was, treating the seizures, and that was obviously the most salient kind of thing at the time. But it wasn't until he was about 5 and he started school that we started noticing that he had not quite on an even par with his peers in terms of his cognitive abilities and intellect and things. And from there, he has pretty much had quite a steady decline in his cognitive abilities. And so now at 15, he speaks in 1 or 2 word sentences, sometimes sentences, but mostly 1 or 2 words. He's not independent at all, so he needs 24/7 care. He still has seizures. They are a lot less and don't need hospitalization, but they are really still a real threat to him. Most of his seizures are nocturnal. So when I was pregnant with my second, we actually, at the first kind of screening, had a call from a midwife. And when you get the call after you've had the screening, you're like, okay, So this isn't good if they're calling me. And so for my second child, we had a 1 in 7 chance that he would have Down syndrome. And so that kind of like just threw me into a space where I was like, how on earth am I going to do this with two? But I did have depression in the perinatal period as well, and I sought the help of the mental health services then. So I had some support around that, but very similar to Anna, I had very little support. My parents weren't around, so it was really kind of on my own. So it was quite an isolating time, and I could have really have done with knowing about parent to parent at that time. So yeah, my second child, to cut a long story short, started having seizures when he was 3 as well. They came out of the blue, and he fortunately, with medication, has been able to become seizure free. So he hasn't had one for about 5 years, no longer on any meds. But he was diagnosed with autism a couple of years ago. So he is very different from his brother, but has his own set of challenges, mostly around emotional regulation and social communication and things like that. So that's kind of where I sort of came into being in this kind of world. And my motivation behind wanting to work for parent to parent was really wanting to be able to provide support to other parents that I didn't have at the time. And so I thought I'd just let you know a bit about what we do and the kind of support that we offer. So we're primarily for parents and caregivers who have disabled or neurodivergent children, or children with a serious health impairment of any age. And the idea is that we provide lifelong support. So it's not just something that you access when your child is young. The idea is that it's there for the life of the whānau, of the child. So I have got a bit of a slide. I'm not sure how to share my screen. Something's just popped up.
There should be a green box with an arrow that allows you to share.
The one that says share screen. that one.
That'd be it.
Yeah. I am not always that technologically advanced, but that's okay. So this is us. We, as I said, provide support for whānau. We've been around for about 40 years, and we're a pan-disability organisation. So it's not just for whānau that have autistic family members, or we do sort of go right across the board in terms of any disability. Is it going to work? Great. Yeah, so these are our core services. They are our biggest, and the one that takes the most of our time is the tailored information that we supply. So any disability or disability related topic, and we have a team of researchers who take the information from whānau or from the family member that's requesting it, and filtered quite often through somebody that's doing my role, especially if it's local information that they require. And we're trying to sort of tailor make information packs for exactly kind of what they're looking for to find out. So really kind of more specific, the better sometimes. But if they just want general information around something like, they've just got a diagnosis of autism and they're wanting to just kind of know a little bit about what it means, where to go from here, that sort of thing, we can put together a pack for that. If somebody's wanting information around toileting for their child with a disability, depending on the actual disability, they'll go away and find evidence-based information relating to that topic to provide the parents for support. So I think the really great thing about this is it's free, number one, whether you've got a disability or not, whether you've got a diagnosis or not. You don't have to have a diagnosis to be able to access our services, which is really cool. So even if a parent is potentially suspecting, at that early stage, even at the age of sort of 18 months to 2 years, that something might be going on for their child, they can get in contact with us and ask about, some of the information. What are the signs that I need to look out for? If I am concerned, what do I do? Those kinds of things. So that's our kind of core sort of service that we provide. And then we've got workshops and events, and we've got some core workshops that we provide. We also work alongside Altogether Autism and Care Matters to provide other sort of workshops that can help parents and caregivers navigating the health system. Like Anna was saying, it's a bit of a minefield out there. So it's really great to be able to have that kind of support to help them sort of find their feet. Because when, as I have experienced, when you get a diagnosis like autism, it's very overwhelming, in terms of, how you feel as a parent to actually have that as your reality, let alone now what do I do? What kind of supports are available? Can I get funding? Where do I go for that? And that sort of thing. So our workshops cover a lot of those things, as well as kind of carer wellbeing, which is something that's really important as well. Support groups, as Anna mentioned as well. It's so great to be able to have that connection with other parents that get it, and just kind of really sort of talk things through, talk about the hard things, talk about the good things, because a lot of the time, some of the things that you'll really celebrate as a parent with a child with disability may be so completely different from what other parents might be experiencing and their wins and their things. So it's really great to be able to have that kind of solidarity, I guess, with a group of people that really kind of understand what you're going through. So our support groups, we have in the Wellington region, we have 6 in-person support groups across the region in different areas. The information for that is all on our website, if you want to access that on the events page. We also do have an online support group, which is quite specific to a certain profile of autism called PDA, or pathological demand avoidance. And just to kind of highlight, the importance of whānau and caregivers finding their people or their tribe, or like people that actually really can just walk alongside them. This particular group is definitely my favorite. We started it up sort of mid last year because I found I was talking to a lot of parents that had this PDA profile, and I'd never heard of it before, but they all had a very common experience in saying, this is so isolating, don't know what to do. And so the online group has just become this little community, and they've got a WhatsApp chat group, which a lot of our most of our support groups have got as well, so parents can just keep in touch, because the support group meetings are monthly. So in between times, they share resources, they share stories, they share all sorts of things. And I just actually checked it this morning, and one of them said, the parents said, I love this place. This is such a great place to be, They really just have that sense of belonging and being seen and heard, which I think for a parent of a child with a disability is just so validating, because it sort of just kind of reinforces the fact that, this isn't your parenting, that is particularly, if it's something like autism. Because I think a lot of the time they feel kind of blamed for, their child's behaviour or something like that, for example. So that's our support groups. We also have 2 types of peer support that we offer. The one is the parent support network. So we try and match, if somebody comes and says they'd like to speak to another parent who has a specific, journey or something similar that's going on for their child, we try and match them with somebody who's gone through something like that. We have a network of trained volunteers who are peer support, and they offer a one-off phone call to that parent of support to just talk through what they're going through, and sort of let them know, what helped them or the things that they might find useful. If they want to carry on the conversation after that, they're more than welcome to, and that's an agreement that's made between the support parent and the person who's requested the support. We also have sibling support, which is a program that we offer for 8 to 18-year-olds. And it's really about kind of having that similar type of thing to the parent support, but peer support from other children who have disabled siblings. We have one day sib shops, we call them, like workshops, where they can talk through with sib leaders who are also siblings, have siblings with disabilities. So they've been through it as well. They get it. And they facilitate these workshops to give the kids a chance to just talk through what it's like, you know, to have that sort of opportunity to sit alongside their peers that get it as well. And then they go off and do something fun like ice skating or trampolining or something like that. And once a year, we also have a sib camp, which is basically like an extended version of the workshop, but they have a fun chance to go and do lots of different activities and just make some really valuable connections. And it's really lovely to see them getting in touch outside of those spaces too. So those are our main core sort of services that we offer. One of the things that we do a lot of, and I do a lot of in my job, is to just speak to parents on the phone, because a lot of the time they need some sort of support. They may not know what they need, and so just giving us a call and talking to somebody who has been through it and has some idea of local supports or, you know, the way the system works, can just kind of really give them a sense of, you know, it's going to be okay. You know, I'm not the only one. I'm not isolated. And they can come back and access our support at any time. You know, it's not just a one-off thing. And I think it's a really great way of being able to drip feed that information to parents because, as I said earlier, it can be quite overwhelming to just receive a pack, you know, when you get a diagnosis and just sort of think, okay, what do I do now? There's a lot of information. What do I need? What's the next right thing for me? So that's kind of really what we're there for, just to know, for people to know that we're always there. If they need it, they can tap into it as and when they need. Amy mentioned it in the introduction that we, the Enabling Good Lives principles. So we're committed to our service aligning with those principles. And if you are unfamiliar with those, you can go onto the Enabling Good Lives website and view what they are. But it was really interesting to hear what Anna was saying in terms of some of the things that she felt in those early stages of not having choice and control. And so the Enabling Good Lives principles are really there to guide, services around disability support services, so that we can ensure that the disabled people have a good life and that it's, they have self-determination, they have choice and control over what, they've got access to. In terms of, and when I say that, I mean, being actually given the choice to know what you can access, not just being sort of given one option and saying, this is what you have to do, And I think for me, when I was first given the results that my son potentially could have Down syndrome, if I look back to that, I was given a brochure and told basically the brochure was around whether or not I wanted to keep the child. And I was told that I could have another type of quite invasive test as well to find out, but which, had a risk of miscarriage. So that was really kind of my choice. There wasn't anything else that kind of gave me an idea that actually, I could do this or what support would be available to me if that did turn out to be the case. Obviously, it wasn't for me. But yeah, just that kind of having that mana enhancing, like that we give disabled people and whānau who have children with disabilities the choice and the ability to realize that this isn't a diagnosis, is not the end for them, and their family member can have a good life. the New Zealand disability strategy is also kind of guided by these principles, but then, based on what disabled people say is most important to them as well. So just when we're providing services to our families, we want to make sure that we're guided by those principles so that we are really kind of putting them at the center, because I think it's important to realize that not all disabled people are the same either. They've had different experiences growing up. Their family dynamics are different. And as Anna mentioned before, past traumas and things like that, which a lot of them get brought up to the front, when you're faced with a situation like a child having a diagnosis. So just being really aware and finding out more about that person and more about what their background is and what their wants and needs are, that's specific to, and because it's so nuanced, isn't it, to their situation, rather than focusing on their impairment and presuming that that is what disables them. And so this is part of the social model of disability, which is what the New Zealand disability strategy is kind of, based on as well, which is that the impairment is not what disables a person. It's the environment and the and society that has disabled them, and is not enabling them to be able to live a good life. So just kind of focusing on that and using that as kind of a bit of a guide. The last thing to say is my podcast called That's Good to Know, and it's a bit of an extension of my work. It is a sort of on-air support group, and we share stories and experiences of other parents with children with disabilities, and really just kind of designed to be a place where parents can go to and hear other stories, to feel like they're not alone, if they may not be able to get to a support group or access other services. Just actually kind of, hearing the story of somebody else and hearing yourself in that story can be quite empowering. And that's exactly the feedback that I've had so far, that parents have said, look, I just don't have time to get along to a support group, but I've learned so much from just hearing what other people have been through, the things that work for them, and just their attitudes and perceptions of what this life looks like. It has just been really, really helpful. So that's what we're there for, and that's on Wellington Access Radio every fortnight on a Saturday at 1 p.m, and it can be accessed on Spotify as well, and Apple. So yeah, I think that's everything. Trying to cram that all in. Kia ora, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Meredith. I think you were right. That was a beautiful follow-on to Anna's journey. And thank you for sharing the start of your life and life with children. That's always really interesting and powerful to hear people's journeys from the start. And I think, like you say, just highlighting those services that are there for people that we might not know about, that we can take away from this, is really great. So thank you very much. Next up, I'd like to introduce, and I'm just going to say I haven't actually heard your name pronounced, so I'm probably going to get it wrong, so just correct me if I am wrong. But I would like to introduce Zandra Vaccarino. Did I say it right? Or
Vaccarino, yes, you have.
Vaccarino. So Zandra is the National Executive Officer for the New Zealand Down Syndrome Association. Zandra will discuss how to support parents receiving a Down syndrome diagnosis, the importance of non-biased comprehensive information and support options from the moment of diagnosis through pregnancy and beyond. Thank you, Zandra.
Kia ora, and thank you, everyone. I do want to thank Anna and Meredith, because I think you've actually shared so much of what I'm going to talk about this morning. So the first thing, I am based in Palmerston North, and it's wonderful to be part of this korero, and so thank you. I'd like to start this morning. I'm hoping that my it's just not sharing, so I'm just going to do it again. Not quite sure what's going on, so hopefully we get through the technical difficulties of getting the slides going.
We can see it.
Oh, you can. I just can't move it. It's become inactive. Oh. So that's a bit of a problem. While I'm doing that and sorting it out, what I'm going to just say quickly is I'd like you to imagine yourself sitting on the beach right now. having a coffee, a wine, whatever you're doing, and you get a phone call. And in this phone call, it's a dear friend, a sibling, your child, that phones to tell you that they've just received a positive diagnosis, that their baby has Down syndrome. And I'd like you just to grab a pen and paper right now, or on your phone, or just in your mind, just remember this. How do you feel? What emotions are you going through? What are you experiencing right now? And just put that there for yourselves for a minute. So I also just want to share a little bit about the Down Syndrome Association. I don't have lots of time to do it, and you can please go to our website and see more, but I would like to share the following. And just checking you can see in here.
The New Zealand Down Syndrome Association,
No,
a
we can't see
whānau
that.
organisation on a
Sorry?
We can't see it. We can only hear it.
Oh, that is so weird. Let's try one more time.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
okay. We've got that one now. Yeah.
The New
fantastic.
Zealand Down Syndrome Association, a family whānau organisation on a mission to support, educate, empower and advocate alongside people with Down syndrome, whānau and professionals.
So one of the first things I wanted to ask you is, how do you think that families feel when they get the news that they have a baby with Down syndrome? And right now, I'd like you to go back to those thoughts that you popped down. And I think Meredith sort of explained some of those feelings really well. And so I just one of the things I think we need to consider is how people will respond, is how we think they will respond. It's really important to think about that. What were your feelings and emotions? What was your knowledge of Down syndrome? Do you know anybody with Down syndrome? It's because once we acknowledge how we might experience, we realize that we bring unconscious bias into situations sometimes, whether they're positive or negative, they do impact on our conversations with parents. And we need to consciously manage our bias when engaging with parents. And the reason this is so important is that this is a moment that you'll never forget. This is my son. He's 30 years old now, and I can still clearly remember where we were, what we were doing, when I was told that he had Down syndrome. We only found out once he was born, and in those days, testing took a while. So, we went home with our little baby and then found out afterwards. And unlike Anna and Meredith, I actually had the most amazing experience. We did come into the experience with being very open to inclusion and valuing diversity and knowing what everybody brings. And although the social model of disability wasn't spoken about a lot, that's the perspective we brought into the situation. So I think our experience, even if we hadn't had a good experience, we would have still held on to that. But that's where our values were at the time. But we were really fortunate to have a pediatrician that sort of did things the way that they should be done. And we had this positive experience. But I have to say that all my friends at the time, I can't say they had that experience. They had the Meredith experience. And I answer support calls and have been involved in the disability sector for 30 years now. And very seldom do I hear positive stories. I hear stories, and the only word to explain it is a trauma story. Really distressful. So words have power, and we need to remember them. Our first words to a family have a lifelong impact. They carry it forever. If you ask them what's your story, they'll tell you so often. And it shapes the ongoing story of that family and their life. And their life with their child. And so what we say and how we say it influences that whole process of how families feel about their baby, themselves, and the future of their family. And we hear some horrific stories of how professionals actually share this information. And it's in the midst of really complex, time-sensitive decisions that parents have to make. Often, as Meredith has explained, the only information that families are given, they tell us, is actually a leaflet on termination. And so they have to deal with everything. And this has a real impact on mental health and well-being that can actually carry on for a lifetime if it's not actually addressed and dealt with. It impacts on the confidence of parenting a child with Down syndrome, and I think it definitely impacts on that bonding and the connections that family have. And so the real emphasis I want to put down here is this isn't just a medical conversation. I think so often it's seen as a medical conversation, but it is a defining moment and it's much more than that. So I think what we bring into that situation needs to be around the power and presence of language. And we need to think about the words we use and how we show up can either support, encourage, or harm people. Families remember the tone, they remember their expressions, they remember the body language more than they ever remember the clinical facts. And so the bias that we bring into such situations, subtle or unintentional, can distort perceptions, increase distress, and shape how parents view their child and their choices that they have ahead. And so how we engage really influences the process, and the news could be better or worse. And so we really say the first word we should be saying to any parents is congratulations, they're having a baby. That's exciting. Let's celebrate it. And we created a video with families who said, if only when they got their diagnosis, this is what professionals said to them.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Happy birthday.
The greatest whānau or the greatest treasure is found in the hidden places. It's actually really exciting, and you get to be part of such a beautiful community.
So I think it's really important to recognize that we need to hold space for grief, hope, and questions as professionals. Parents will react differently to finding out that they have a child with Down syndrome. And, for some families, they've been trying to have a baby for so very long that they're quite happy. They may have a family member that has Down syndrome. And sometimes people perceive that this is not news that they'll want to hear when they're quite happy with it. For other families, no, it isn't news they expected. And they have a range of feelings, and that's all okay. And we need to really validate that for them. We need to create a space for expectant parents to express those feelings. And what families need really is space to process. They need to be able to ask questions, to feel supported. They really do need time and not to feel rushed or overwhelmed or pressurized, and they need reassurance. Many parents say that the way that they feel immediately when they hear that diagnosis after is not the way that they stay a few days later, weeks or months after processing the news. And while there are many different models of grief, this is one that I think is real, and it's to recognize there is a grief. Families have expected to have a baby, they've made plans, they see this baby in a particular way, and now they have to come to terms with actually the reality is a little different, and they have to experience and they have to be allowed to experience whatever emotions they're feeling, and then they have to adjust to this new experience and then reinvest in the reality. And throughout that, they need support. So it's time to really create that space to show concern and support during challenging times. And we've heard from Anna and Meredith how for them that wasn't given to them. They need to be reminded that they're not alone on the journey, and they really do need to be connected with other parents and families who have children with Down syndrome that they can chat to, and they need information. But one of the things I want to say about information, it's really important that, yes, we have a parent pack, and yes, it is given to families. But sometimes it's given when they've just been told. They're still trying to process. Giving it information at that moment is the wrong time. They put it down, they can't deal with it. Then people think, oh, I've given it. Or they don't go back and check, have they read it? And often families have just put it aside and they've actually forgotten. So you need to go back and make sure that when you're giving that information, that is appropriate. You need to put processes in place that the necessary health professionals are available to answer questions and for follow-up. And I would really stress here, it shouldn't be for the families to navigate this. This is something that should be done. It's like, when would it suit you? I'll make the appointment, because this is just in the too overwhelming basket for families. Please plan for follow-up. We know that there will be follow-up, but there needs to be one for the space to process how people are experiencing things and what they're feeling like, and make sure that they're ready for the next step. And I think it's really important to remember this is beyond the diagnosis. It's about seeing the whole family. It's not just medical information. It's that deeply personal situation. And I think Anna and Meredith have both pointed out, the impact that personal has for you. It's about effective supports begin with understanding the emotional, the cultural, the relationship landscape of each family. Realizing that it's very different. For some families, they can draw strength from friends, from whānau, spirituality, culture, while others, they don't have that and they can feel isolated and overwhelmed. Recognizing the diversity of families and making sure that we're responsive and culturally appropriate. I think it's really important to remember that supports need to connect, not direct. So it needs to be clear, non-directive, non-biased information. It needs to be respectful, really using value-neutral language. There needs to be support. It needs to empower. Values informed but not value imposing, and culturally appropriate. I think it's important to explain what Down syndrome is. Often people have no idea. It needs to be accurate. There needs to be lived experience. And as Meredith said, what we often find with pre-diagnosis is that the only information that's provided is on termination. So all balanced information and all options should be provided to families. Really important to follow up and see if families want to be connected to the Down Syndrome Association and meet other families and assist with non-directive counselling. I think the things that you should do is really going back to the things that my pediatrician did. He was really comfortable talking about screening and the results and talking about Down syndrome. So he wasn't feeling uncomfortable in the conversation. He used value neutral language, which I think is so important. And he avoided the direct use of emotive language like, I have bad news for you, because no. He shared the information in a supportive environment. He made a private space, created enough time, and made sure that my husband was with me, but it could be a support person as well. He gave me information about Down syndrome, and he gave really lived experience. He had patients, he knew people, and he spoke about those lived experience. Gave an overview of Down syndrome, chatted to me about some of the questions we might have had, new information about myths and facts, and could address those if need be. And I think it's important to be able to do that. Gave us space to ask questions and provided information about the Down Syndrome Association. And I think that was sort of what made a real difference for us as well, because he said, phone them. They've gone through this, they've walked through this before, and contact them. Checked whether I was comfortable making that call, because it can often be really difficult to make the call. But I was, otherwise he said he would contact them. And I think on this point, it's really important to say this is where a pressure point comes as well. Because once we brought in privacy, a lot of professionals think that it's a violation of privacy to make a referral. We always used to get lots of referrals, but it's just about getting permission. Can I pass on your details so that they can contact you? Make sure that there's follow-up visits, and don't put people under pressures. And then just moving on to the last points really is stories that shape understanding. I think we've heard this. Actually, the connection to other families who've walked this road is really important about doing reassurance and supporting people. And I think peer support really validates insights that professionals just don't have. Reach out to the NZDSA. We have supports and resources and do a range of things that you can find out on our website. There are particular conversations around what families want to share with other families. And I think together we can build a better path. Because, and this is the message that really needs to be shared, while you might not be expecting this journey, it's still a beautiful journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Zandra. I think, you're right. Words do have power, and how we engage with our whānau is really important. I feel like we needed a longer session to get to actually delve into some of this stuff in a little more detail, so we might have to look at that for the future. But I wanted to thank the speakers that have Anna's had to pop off for a meeting, but Meredith and Zandra, thank you very much. I am aware of the time. The next up, well, I was just going to share my personal journey, and if people have time to hang around for that for sort of the next 10 minutes, that would be great. Otherwise, I could share the transcript with you if that's easier, if people have to go. But if you're happy to stick around, I will say my story. So I've been with Parta for about a year, and over that time I've been sort of working through whether or not I wanted to share what I had experienced during the birth of my first child. I've got three children, so my first experience at birth kind of took me by surprise. I suppose it just does anyway, but mine was a little bit like not what I expected. And yeah, so I've got to a point where I thought that I'll do it online rather than standing in front of a room. I'll test it out first and do it online. So you guys are the first to hear it. So feedback welcome. But I will share with you yeah, my first son, his name is Abel. And it's his birth that I'm sharing with you today. So when I had Abel, I was 27 and I was living in Wellington. I still live in Wellington. My family all live in WA in Perth, so I didn't have my family around me. And my husband he worked for Weta. He worked very, very long hours, wasn't home very much. And I had planned to keep working up right until the very last minute. In my mind, it would be maybe like a week before I had the birth of my child, just to save as much money as we could. We had a mortgage and all that sort of stuff. However, my body did not want to agree with me on that. And at about 29 weeks and 4 days, I was at work and some things didn't feel quite right. I wasn't in major pain, but just a little bit of uncomfortableness. And so I thought, oh, something didn't feel right. So I drove myself home. I was working in town, drove out to the Hutt Valley where I lived and still wasn't quite sure what was going on. And I rang my mum in Australia and explained to her what I was feeling. And she said, oh, I think just go in and see. I was lucky enough to be able to have an obstetrician. She said, just pop into the hospital and see your obstetrician. So I did that. And she had I really trusted this obstetrician. She'd already seen me through 2 previous miscarriages. So I went in to see her and she explained to me that actually I was going to labor. So she gave me whatever they give you and some steroids and things. But being at the Hutt Hospital, they can't deliver babies that early. They can only take them from 32 weeks. So she said that she would have to transfer me into Wellington, which I didn't want because I wanted to be with her, but she said that her hands are tied. She has no option but to do that. So they transferred me to Wellington Hospital, which was quite different because nobody knew me. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what was going on. So they transferred me there. They said that I was still in labor, but it wasn't really progressing. And they would they would monitor me and try to give me more drugs and keep it under control. But I would have to stay in hospital until the baby was born. And I was like, well, I can't do that. I have to go to work. So, because I need to get some more money to pay our mortgage when I take maternity leave. And they were just like, cool story. So I was like, okay, right. So they admitted me. And I was just quietly, internally panicking about how we were going to do this. But I didn't get very much time to dwell on those thoughts because then I just started bleeding. And in my mind, that meant that my baby was dying, that I was having a miscarriage because that's what I'd experienced in the past. They took me back up to a birthing suite because they still didn't really know what was happening, and put me on a heart monitor for the baby. And basically that's kind of how I stayed for about 3 days. And in my mind, I just kept not thinking to myself, well, as long as I can hear his heart beating, that he's okay. I didn't know it was a he at that time actually, but he's okay. And I just need to keep listening to that. So I spent, about 3 days listening to his heartbeat and hoping that everything was going to be okay. I didn't really tend to ask many questions because I didn't want to hear the answers that I thought I was going to have to hear. So I just didn't ask questions. I just kept thinking, well, as long as they're not saying anything, then everything's going to be fine. But nobody seemed to quite know what was happening. And at about the 3-day mark, they said to me, well, they didn't say to me, I heard them saying to a midwife that they wouldn't try to stop the labor anymore. They'd let me go into labor. But they didn't say that to me. They said it to everyone around me. And I didn't know what that was going to be like because I had not been attending antenatal classes. I didn't know actually even how I was going to give birth to what I assumed was a baby who might not be healthy and what all that meant. And I was exhausted and I was panicking about how I was even going to do this. Again, I didn't say anything because I just didn't do that. And so I just waited to see. then they waited another few hours and then decided that they were too uncertain about what was going on, so that they were going to give me an emergency C-section. And I felt better about that because I thought, well, okay, they can have more control over what's happening now, and it's not up to me to try to birth this baby. They can just take him out and see what's going on. So I went in to do that. And they did explain really well to me, like what it was going to feel like. And I was like, okay. And at this point, I just wanted to have him out to make sure that everything was okay. So they did the C-section and took him out, and he gave a nice little cry, which I could hear. And I was like, good, he's crying. That's a good thing. That's one thing I did know. So I heard that. And then they showed him to me. And you could see straight away that something wasn't quite right with his head, like, because they have the fontanelles. And again, I didn't know much, but I was like, I'm pretty sure that doesn't look right. And I said, is his head right? And they said, no, it's not. And I was like, oh, okay. But then they kind of didn't really say anything else, or I just couldn't hear anything else. I still knew he was breathing. And so they took him away to the NICU, which is what they told me they were going to have to do. But sadly, because the NICU was really busy that day and they had some really sick babies in there, I didn't get to see him again for about 6 hours. They wouldn't let me in to see him. And when I did go in and see him, he was obviously all hooked up to everything he needed to be hooked up to. And I knew that they were running a bunch of tests on him, but I didn't ask any more questions. I just knew that he was breathing, and that meant he was alive, and that was okay for now. But I didn't want to ask anything else because I didn't want to know what I thought they were going to tell me. So instead, I just panicked for about 2 more days. And I panic internally when I panic. It's not a very visible thing. Until the point where my husband, or Abel's father at the time, said to me, what's going on? Like, because I just wasn't myself. I was just really kind of withdrawn and wouldn't sort of talk, and just kept saying that I needed to see my baby and I wanted to be with my baby. And I said, well, he's dying. And he said, why do you think that? And I said, well, because he's hooked up to all these things and they won't let him take him home. I wanted to take him home. I thought if he was okay, that they would let me take him home. I didn't actually, strangely enough, understand anything about what needed to happen next, even though you think you would. And now looking back, I'm like, how did I not know that? And so finally, people reassured me that while they didn't quite know what was happening with him, that he was stable, he wasn't dying, and in these moments, and in the foreseeable future, they didn't think that that was going to happen, and that he just needed to stay there and grow and get healthy. And I was like, okay. So I finally kind of understood that. He couldn't tolerate milk, any breast milk or anything at the time, so they had long lines in him and were feeding him. He actually did really well with his breathing, but obviously after about 5 days, I had to leave the hospital and go to my home, which was in the Hutt Valley, and I sort of freaked out about that, but there was just no other option. I had to go. I couldn't stay with him, so I did that, but I would call the hospital every night to check on him. And they would, of course, tell me that everything was fine. But what I didn't like was if something little changed, to me, that was a big deal. And they didn't tell me what was happening with him. So, for example, I might go and he didn't have oxygen in, but overnight he might have got a bit tired, so they'd put the oxygen back on him, and when I got there in the morning he'd have oxygen. Now to me that's big. I want to know that something happened to my kid, but to them it's quite a small thing and it doesn't really mean much, and that's just part of the care. And so I just felt I didn't like that they did things to my baby without me being able to say, yes, do them. Not that I was ever going to say, no, don't do them, but he was my baby and I wanted to take care of him. And I really struggled with that for the whole time, basically, any time they did things which needed to be done, to be fair. And so what they discovered over time as well is that he had been born without bone on the top of his head. And again, they didn't know what that meant. Any other tests that they could run at that time were sort of coming back normal, but they didn't know really what it meant for what he would be like as he started to grow and what that would look like. So I'm not great at not having answers. So obviously that was something that just stuck with me, but I just had to kind of deal with that because nobody knew. We just had to wait and see. Um, Eventually they moved him out to the hospital once he got bigger. So he was really close to me then. So I was literally like 2 minutes from the hospital. So I could be there as much as I wanted. I started to have a lot more ability to care for him myself as he got bigger and stronger. They took the long lines out to take him to the hospital and that. So he was feeding by himself. So that really I really started to relax a wee bit more then because I was like, I believed in that he was going to be okay and I was going to eventually get to take him home. What I felt at the hospital, which would have changed things for me, I guess, was just people just didn't have time. They didn't have the time to actually see what was going on for me, to potentially ask the questions that needed to be asked, and to really connect with me. Like I didn't trust anyone there. I wasn't going to ask anyone questions. It was kind of like they needed to come to me and find out where I was at and ask if I really understood things because I just wouldn't ask. I would just go, okay, this is the information that got me. My brain would then run with that whichever way it wanted to run, whether it was right or wrong. So I think again, if I'm looking back, the only thing I could say, like the people were lovely, they were doing the absolute best jobs that they could, but nobody had time to be with me. And there's that continuity of care, I guess, as well. Like midwives were swapping in and out as their shifts finished. I didn't know who was coming to see me that day. So of course, if it was someone new, then I'm definitely not talking to them because I don't know who they are and I don't trust them and all that sort of business. Once we left the hospital, I was actually really confident taking Abel home because the nurses had got him into a routine before we left the skiboo in the Hutt Valley. And I was actually really grateful for that. And I never experienced any fear in actually taking him home and taking care of him myself. I experienced that with my second child because I had never taken a newborn home that wasn't in a routine. But with Abel, I was quite comfortable to take him home. I knew when to feed him. I knew when to change him. I did feel like I knew how to take care of him when we took him home. But what I did struggle with was attending playgroups and things like that because nobody like that people in my mind were like perhaps complaining about how their baby wouldn't sleep and just sharing their challenges, but for me I was just like I would have loved to have had that happen. I didn't have the same thought processes as the people that I was trying to connect with. And so I just kind of couldn't. Also, Abel wasn't really like as time went on, he wasn't allowed to kind of go and get into things and crawl and climb and things like that because he wasn't really allowed to hit his head. Um, so but having said that, he didn't try to do any of those things either. He didn't develop at the same rate as all the other kids. So mums were sort of going, oh, their kid's sitting up or their kid's doing this. And mine wasn't. And then I would sort of panic about, oh, do I need to be worried about this? And then finally he would meet the milestone that he needed to meet. But I just felt like I was, again, not in line with anybody else. I couldn't find anyone that kind of understood what I'd gone through and my perspective on things. And I think back on that again, and it's like I think perhaps what would have changed that. And again, I think it just comes down to people having the time, like potentially like the Plunket nurses having the time to connect with me, given I'd had a kind of different birthing experience to what might be considered to be the norm, to have the time to actually probably sit down and actually say, anyone would be struggling with this. Do you want to talk about that? And you never have those conversations with people. And that's probably what I needed to draw me out to be able to find out where I was at. And what I feel from that experience is that it actually changed me as a person for a really long time. It kind of changed my personality. I became a very anxious person, way more guarded. My whole world kind of narrowed down to nothing kind of mattered except my children and protecting them because I didn't feel like I had been able to protect them. I became a wee bit overprotective, some might say, constantly kind of alert and on edge all the time. And this progressed through like the next two pregnancies that I had as well. It kind of never went away and got it kind of probably got worse over time. And it took years for me to be able to, because my youngest now is 10. And she was probably about 3 or 4 before I actually got the mental clarity back to be able to look back at myself and see that things had changed for me over those years. And, you know, I feel like I've definitely sort of been able to deal with that now, but I feel like the impact on my children for that, it's subtle, but I can see it, like how I sort of hovered over them. I was fearful of letting them do certain things. Now that Abel is now 15, he was diagnosed when he was about 4 with autism, ADHD, a general intellectual disability, and he also has seizures as well. But he's doing fantastic in this world, doing amazing things. But I see the impact of sort of some of my overprotective behaviors on my middle son, how he's a little bit anxious to do things. And so it's kind of like me passing on stuff to him that perhaps I maybe wouldn't have if I had have been able to access or the right sort of support, or again, more just that people had time to spend that little bit of extra time with me and really find out where I was at. And I will leave it there. But if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to ask or email me later. And thank you very much. I will close us off quickly because I'm again very aware of the time. But I just want to thank our speakers that are still here, and thank everyone who attended today. If you need any information, just drop me an email and we can send you some more things. I will quickly close us with the karakia so you can all get back to your days. Bear with me a moment. Kia tau te rangimari, ki runga i ngā iwi o te ao. Let your peace reign on all the people of the world. Thank you very much for joining us today.